welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. Over the last few weeks, I have been thinking about a particular crossover that shows up in conversations when I'm working with people or couples, whether it's vanilla or lifestyle related. These types of conversations come up when people start asking about the connection inside of BDSM and dynamics, or how certain things show up in their relationships. The experiences people can describe, they're often really powerful scenes that for them carry maybe a lot of emotional charge or focus, or even in regular relationships, the vulnerability that people don't easily show in the other parts of their lives. And because of that, it's not unusual for someone to walk away with a real intense scene, feeling like something deeply meaningful just happened between the two of you. And the moment that ends, people are catching their breath and they're still kind of on an emotional high. And somewhere in that thought, this thought shows up and it says, this must mean something bigger just happened between the two of you, right? And we start maybe even superseding the connection itself, and we're trying to look for a deeper meaning here. But before we go any further, like I do every week, I want to say thank you to all of those who keep listening, sharing the show, reaching out about conversations. Interesting enough, got a comment from Germany that was talking to me about this very topic today, and their own journey of understanding it. So I want to say I appreciate that conversation. Thank you. Dankeschön. A couple of new people from around the world. I see you. I hear you again. Vancouver, Ottawa, Toronto. Just name a couple big cities because you asked specifically for your cities. Not sure why. Caracas. Interesting enough. I hope you're safe down there. Sao Paulo. And Milan. Thank you very much. I see all of you. So yeah, I don't mind shouting out to you. I can't do everybody because otherwise the entire show will be me thanking new people coming in. I'm glad this is giving you some sort of language to understand. I know some of you might struggle with the translation, but there is a transcription available, and if you can transcribe that into your own base language and that helps you, wonderful. Right? I'm here to help in whatever way I can, and if you want to follow up with questions, great. Right? So if you're new here and this is the first couple of shows you're in, welcome. Glad you're here. Do me a favor, you all, if you all are finding these conversations useful, if you're following me on Spotify, download the app. If you're on the app, rate the show 5 stars. That way this show keeps growing. More people who need the show keep finding it. If you're on YouTube, like, subscribe, follow, right? You'll know when new episodes drop, which is the same time. I do want to let you all know that, so the YouTube algorithm, real quick, for some reason, it's in the wording of my titles, privates my show, so the public can't generally see it. So I have to publish it like 3 or 4 times for it to get seen. Nothing I can do, so I'm trying to reword the titles and go from there. If you want to support the show directly, the work that I do here, there is a link in the show's description. That support keeps these conversations going. All right, enough of all that now. The reason I wanted to do this show today is because scenes can create very powerful emotional experiences. There's anticipation before things begin, the shift in power, pain, praise, surrender, right? Two people are focused on each other in a way that rarely happens in an ordinary day-to-day life. And when you share something like that with another person, it can feel incredibly bonding, but intensity and intimacy are not always the same thing. And interesting enough, if you all recall, over the last few months, I have been discussing this, right? So sometimes what people are feeling in that moment is the charge of the experience itself, the adrenaline, right? The psychological focus that happens when two people are completely engaged with each other inside of a scene. So today I want to make or I want to take a little time and talk about the difference between erotic intensity and emotional intimacy and why those things can sometimes get confused in the lifestyle. Now, let's start let's kind of get to the beginning of this, right? So, why do our scenes feel so bonding, so intense? So, one of the things that makes scenes in the lifestyle feel powerful is that they bring several psychological and physiological elements together all at once. Before a scene even begins, something is already building inside of us, right? There's anticipation. We're wondering what's going to happen next. So we imagine it, we fantasize about it. Then we have that nervous energy, and that alone starts activating the nervous system before anything has even begun. And then once the scene starts, several layers tend to come online at the same time, right? The shift in the power exchange, someone stepping into a position of control or leadership, direction or submission, right? The other person's they're gonna surrender and follow and be guided or lead, whatever is gonna have to happen between the two of you. Now, that shift alone carries emotional weight for many people because it taps into trust and vulnerability in a direct way. There's also focus, and we don't talk enough about focus. Now, during a scene, attention narrows. Two people are often paying close attention to each other in a way that doesn't happen, ordinarily in everyday life. Body language, we notice it. Breathing is going to change. Our tone of our voice will change, right? Small reactions are going to matter. Excitement levels are going to go up. So, for that period of time, the outside world tends to kind of fade away, and the interaction that we're involved in becomes very concentrated. So, the level of focus here can feel incredibly connecting. And then there's also vulnerability. Scenes often involve parts of ourselves that we don't easily, find or demonstrate in other environments. Someone might allow themselves to be physically exposed and open emotionally and maybe even psychologically challenged, or even placed in position where they're giving up control in a way that they rarely do elsewhere in their lives. Now, sometimes there's pain involved, or humiliation, praise, surrender, right? Fear. Sometimes it's just the simple act of allowing someone to see you in a position of trust that carries the most emotional weight of all. Now, all of these things activate the nervous system. So your body responds with adrenaline, heightened awareness, and emotional intensity. So the brain is paying close attention here to everything happening in that moment. It's very similar to what happens in other high intensity experiences with that people share together when, you know, we go through something emotionally charged with another person. The mind often interprets that shared intensity as connection, right? Trauma bonding. We can understand that. Car accidents, whatever the case may be. Um, a lot of just anything that's very intentionally grieving a death, right? And in some ways, it is a form of a connection. So, two people are creating an experience together. They're responding to each other in real time. So, there is communication happening through the body language and voice and timing and all this emotional awareness. And all of that can feel very bonding when you're inside of it. But at this point, it helps to define what we're actually talking about because there are two different things that are happening here. Now, first, when I use the phrase here, erotic intensity, what I'm actually talking about is the emotional and physiological charge here that comes from a scene, right? That's the adrenaline, anticipation, the power exchange, vulnerability, and it's the very focused attention two people are giving to each other in that moment, and it does feel electric, and it feels incredibly connecting because both people are fully present in that experience, right? Now, the next part, this is the emotional intimacy. On the other hand, this tends to develop a little bit differently. It builds slower. It grows through trust and conversation and honesty and willingness to let someone else see parts of you that have nothing really to do with the scene. So it forms through time and shared experiences, not just through these very intense or powerful moments. Those two things can absolutely exist together, but they are not the same thing. So the feeling of bonding during a scene, an intense moment does not actually mean the relationship itself has emotional depth behind it. Intensity can create the impression of closeness very quickly here, but the experience, it's going to feel meaningful and it might even feel powerful. And, there are the emotions there in real time. But with that intimacy, when that usually takes a little bit longer to form and it's a quieter process, it develops through repeated interactions and learning how somebody else thinks and communicates and how they handle disappointment or insecurity or conflict, right? How they deal with things when times get tough, right? Now, scenes, on the other hand, compress emotion into a much shorter window of time. A powerful scene might last, I don't know, 20, 40, maybe an hour. If you're someone like me, 6 hours, right? But during that time, the emotional and psychological charge here could be really high. It's going to be very intense. Because of that compression, the brain sometimes interprets the intensity of that moment as evidence of a deeper connection. So someone may walk away from a scene feeling incredibly close to the other person they were just involved with. So they could feel like something meaningful just happened, or um, that some new space was created between them. And sometimes that feeling is genuinely accurate, right? Because scenes can absolutely deepen a connection when they exist in a relationship that already has emotional trust and understanding behind it. But other times, what people are experiencing is the intensity of the moment itself, right? And I'm talking about, again, the adrenaline, that engagement level, right? The sense of being vulnerable and the attention from being present with the other person inside of this whole structured experience, right? We hear the dungeon music going and the lights, and it's a dark and cool environment. And maybe people are cheering us on, but we kind of drown all that out because we are getting deeper and deeper inside of each other, metaphorically speaking, right? So those elements, maybe not, but for the most part, we're going to go metaphorical here on that comment. Those, you don't have to email me when I say stuff that's giggly or sometimes innuendo, right? I know they are. I giggle to myself. I don't even, it's not even intentional, right? I promise you. And there's about 3 or 4 of you have written in and are like, yeah, are you sure? And I'm like, yes, I'm sure. I'm very sure it's not intentional. Just happens to be good timing. Anyway, right? Getting back to this, there are elements that do simulate closeness very effectively. And this is where people start to confuse intensity with intimacy, right? Remember how powerful the scene felt. And then we have to assume that there is an emotional connection must be as equally as deep. Now, understanding that distinction doesn't make scenes any less meaningful. Intensity can be exciting and connective and even transformative in the right context, but recognizing what intensity actually is helps people stay grounded in how relationships actually develop over time, because those are two different things, right? So, sorry, you all. If you hear me pause like that, it's usually because I'm grabbing some water. Um, what actually is emotional intimacy? Right? Because I think we need to kind of get a little deeper into this. So, this is where we have to slow the conversation down, because if erotic intensity is one side of what we're talking about, then emotional intimacy here is the other. And they don't always look the same. Erotic intensity tends to be immediate. It's concentrated moments, the scenes there, emotions get, rise quickly, attention becomes narrow and focused, and both people are just into the moment, right? The experience can feel electric. And that's because both people are fully inside of it. But intimacy works differently, right? It's quieter. Said this before. Doesn't arrive. There's not some powerful magical bell that arrives to let you know you're in it. It builds over time, consistency and honesty, willingness to let somebody in and see parts of you that, aren't the shiniest. They're not the most impressive. They're not the most erotic. They're definitely not some part of a role you're playing or performing, right? So in the lifestyle, it's easy to think about a connection in terms of scenes. The scene becomes the place where people feel most exposed and the most emotionally open, right? They're even psychologically engaged with each other. But intimacy, emotional intimacy, usually develops outside of those moments, right? I can do pickup play with somebody that's just a bottom and it's going to feel intense, right? And I'm going to feel present, and it's going to be, there's going to be some erotic charge there, but that doesn't mean I have any intimacy with this person, right? Even if it's a bottom, I know. And we need to understand that, because that's where our differentiation comes in. But when we start to look at intimacy, when we look at these conversations afterward, where the dust has finally settled, we're coming down and we're just talking. It's this ability to say things that weren't always comfortable, and neither person's leaving. We're talking about our fears and our jealousy, our insecurities, the disappointment, that deeper little things about us, our little picadillos that, for the most part, we put a mask on and never let people see. These are the parts of ourselves that don't always look strong or confident. Those kinds, of conversations require a real different kind of vulnerability than a scene does. Because during a scene, there's a whole lot of structure. There's the roles and the etiquettes and the rules and the dynamic that's going on. There's a leader and then there's somebody following. There's a frame around this whole interaction that both people totally understand. At least I'm going to go with the basic assumption here that you understand what I'm talking about, right? Now, emotional intimacy doesn't have the same, that same structure. It shows up when the roles aren't being performed, when they're not there, when they're not present, when no one's trying to be the dom and the sub in the moment. You're just two people learning who the other person actually is. And that kind of connection takes a whole lot of time. And it develops through, repeated interactions, experiences, how someone handles their ordinary parts of life, how you respond when something goes wrong, and how they deal with frustration, how they talk about their past, how they handle conflict when it shows up. Not just between the two of you, just conflict in general. And overall, over time, those things start to create a picture of who the other person really is. And out of all of this gigantic process, trust evolves. Emotional safety grows out of that process as well. And those are the things that tend to form a foundation of intimacy. And that's also why two people can share extremely intense scenes together and still know very little about the other person emotionally. Because inside the scene, they might feel incredibly connected. The focus, the vulnerability, the psychological charge. But once that scene ends, those roles go away. And they may not actually be a whole lot of, relational depth holding things together. And that's fine. Erotic intensity can make two people feel very close very quickly. And the moment feels meaningful. And I'm not saying the emotions aren't even real, they are. Right? And you know what? You might even think that it's the most transformative experience you've ever had. But intimacy usually reveals itself in very subtle ways. You learn more about the other person sitting together, I don't know, in a quiet room, staring out the window and looking at the mountains or watching TV, right? Or talking honestly about stuff, or how, you're feeling inside of the relationship, or any difficulties you have with it. It's really the willingness to let someone see the parts of you that are uncertain, confused, or even struggling, right? Those are the moments that usually feel dramatic. They don't come with, adrenaline. There's no heightened emotions, but they are the moments where intimacy actually grows. So when people walk away from a scene very close to someone, that feeling does make sense. But I'm not saying something real didn't happen. But the presence of intensity doesn't automatically mean the presence of intimacy, right? Intensity can happen quickly. Intimacy takes time because it's got to build. And understanding that difference is where a lot of clarity begins to show up in the relationships within the lifestyle. And I see this at dungeons a lot, right? I can tell the difference between somebody who's been in a dynamic for years and maybe somebody that's just kind of just getting their feet wet or doing some pickup play. There is a difference. As a matter of fact, I challenge you all the next time you're at an event, kind of, if you don't know the people, guess. Guess by their actions, how their comfortability around each other is. Do the movements look fluid or do they look restrained? Right? You're gonna tell, right? It'll actually even bring what's interesting about another element here to emotional intimacy is you'll recognize it. And when you recognize it, it makes you smile because it brings that warmth to you. You see two people who are very deeply connected, and that's important. All right, so let's talk about here where the confusion happens inside of the lifestyle. Right? So once you understand the difference now between these two things, you start noticing that many dynamics in the lifestyle lean much more heavily toward one than the other. Now, I would say conservatively, I don't have any proof of this, but I would say quite a bit of the connections are built entirely on, or almost entirely on, intensity. Not everyone, but I'm going to say a good majority of them are, right? And I only say that because, there's some people that I look at, and I mean, it's almost like every 3 weeks or a couple of months, they're with somebody new, right? So it's intense, but there's no intimacy, right? It's nothing default. There's no wrong here, but I mean, I'm just going by what I see, right? Because if the scenes are powerful and they feel electric, right? There's focus and all this anticipation and pain and praise and all that other stuff, then that's going to be the time you feel most alive. But when people walk away from that kind of experience, it's very easy for both sides to feel something important was maybe beginning to form. If they both remember how they connected during the scene, then they can also remember that the other person paid attention to them and how that makes them feel. And if they feel, can remember that, then they're going to also understand how that person is being completely present. And so we're also incorporating here, you're seeing the shift, right? We're shifting from just erotic intensity to intimacy. And that kind of experience can be meaningful because outside of our scenes, our connections, they look really different. I hear a lot of this. I'm, I'm doing 24/7, blah, blah, blah. Look, in my experience, true 24/7 is not achievable for the majority of the people on this planet. If I'm being really conservative, I don't know, and you can clap back, but I'll be generous. I'll say somewhere between 20 and 40,000 couples globally probably do 24/7 legit, right? Strict protocols, the other person's following it. It's an MS dynamic more than likely, or OP if you're old to school, which is to me above MS. You're you're not talking to anybody without consent from your dominant. You are told what everything is controlled. Now, do a lot of people have a lot of room for that? I'm not saying you can't, but maintaining that is not for the faint of heart. And to be real with you, I don't think there's more than that many couples out there doing it. However, I could be wrong. I don't know. There's no real working number on it, right? But stripping all of this away, any conversations, that people like this are having, whether it's intimacy based or intensity based, we have to understand initial conversations start fairly surface level, right? Now, we can resolve through communication around our planning our scenes and talking about play. We keep it comfortable, right? And then we even keep vulnerability outside the dynamic for the time being because we're getting to know somebody. Personal lives might even remain largely separate because we don't know who the other person is, right? We really haven't built any intimacy with them. So, in some cases, the emotional connection between two people really comes alive inside of the frame of the scene itself, but not the transition to the intimate side, right? Because as soon as those rules get peeled away, everything around us gets quiet. Sometimes it even feels distant. So if it's going to feel distant, then the pattern is more common than people often want to realize or even admit. And I get people all the time telling me, no, 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 I'm doing this and, it's great. Well, that's wonderful, but you are then the exception. You're not the rule. And it's not that I'm now downplaying all this, but I'm being realistic. Look, I have a career. I write almost every day. I put up memes. I got to deal with social media. I respond to almost everybody I do. I do I do this podcast, and I have my clients. And then in the morning, my most important thing is I have my group therapy for veterans. That's a lot to do. And then I've got to find time for myself. Somewhere in all of that, I manage a dynamic. And let me tell you, there are days where you're just like, God, I can't be bothered. Not because the other person isn't deserving and you don't want to. It's just because you're exhausted from everything else. And then I've got family, world affairs, other things that I consult for in my life. I'm at a different function in my life. So that's why I find it hard to believe when a lot of people tell me, oh, yeah, we're doing 24/7 and it's all we do. And I'm on my knees and daddy comes home and dinner's ready. No, come on. Because you're doing other things. You've got school or you're going to get bored, right? There's too many other factors and people don't factor these things in. But I'm less concerned about how intense you guys are doing it. But tell me how things feel intimately, right? Because all of this asks for time. It asks for conversations that have nothing to do with play. It asks for honesty and purity in your structure. Can you hold that space? Now, when that slower process hasn't had time to develop, it is possible that a relationship may still feel powerful because the intensity that exists during the scenes can carry it, but intensity can't carry into intimacy if you're not doing anything to grow it. And that's where the confusion begins because, someone says, I'm emotionally attached because our scenes are meaningful to me because they're interpreting closeness that they feel as evidence of the relationship must be deepening. And the other person might just simply be enjoying the intensity of the dynamic without assuming that a connection exists at all beyond the structure of what they have. Now, neither person is necessarily wrong on what they experienced. The scene was real, and the emotions were real in that moment. And that's the caveat. Even the connection inside the frame of play may have had and must be very genuine, because otherwise, you're not going to finish the scene. But if the relationship outside hasn't developed in the same level or similar pace or with any emotional depth, the two people may actually just be experiencing the dynamic in two different ways. And that difference of interpretation is where misunderstandings often start to appear. Because if people assume feelings are mutual when they're actually responding to different aspects of the connection, one person is responding to the emotional impact and the other person is responding to the experience of the play without necessarily building a same emotional bond, the confusion and the disagreements are going to begin. And because intensity here feels so convincing in the moment, it can take time for people to recognize the difference. So they remember how powerful the scene was or how all of them were. And they may remember the vulnerability and the focus and the way they felt, being or think that they were seen or even understood during those moments. Now, those experiences can leave, a real strong emotional impression, but emotional impressions created by intensity don't always reflect the full structure of the relationship. And this is why it can sometimes feel confusing when the dynamic that felt powerful in one specific moment doesn't have any weight outside of it, especially emotionally. And in many cases, the answer is simply that the connection was built primarily through intensity. And intensity, by its nature, lives most strongly in the moments where the scene is active. That doesn't make those experiences meaningless. It just, scenes can be still very powerful and cathartic places between two people. But you have to recognize where the connection actually lives. And that way, you'll understand what kind of relationship you actually have and are participating in. And it does help separate the emotional charge of the moment from the deeper process of building intimacy over time. Once people begin to see, that distinction more clearly, it becomes easier to understand why some dynamics feel incredibly powerful during scenes while remaining relatively shallow outside of them. And again, neither is wrong, but if you're wondering why I feel super connected and, when they're done, they just walk away and I don't hear from them for a week until we play again, you might not be on the same level or it might mean something different to you, right? All right. So here's the next part of this: when intensity and intimacy do come together. Now, that might even sound a little heavy if we stop the conversation just there, but because intensity itself it's not the problem. It's exciting and connective and deeply meaningful, and especially when it's placed in the right type of relationship. What changes things is when intensity and intimacy start working together like a tag team instead of standing in for each other, right? And when I say a tag team, they're going at it at the same time instead of one tagging in for the other, right? When emotional intimacy already exists between two people, the experience of the scene begins to take, a different quality. It's no longer just a place where the connection shows up. It becomes one way that the connection is just expressed. And the relationship already has a whole lot of depth behind it. There's trust and the conversations and the vulnerabilities. They've seen each other in ordinary moments, not just on a heightened space of the scene. So that foundation changes how intensity feels. Because when two people trust each other emotionally, the vulnerability inside of a scene lands differently. And if you don't think I'm right, go do a pick up a scene with no one you've ever met before on the same way you did a scene the week before with somebody that you're attached to. They can carry probably similar intensities. I would argue your pickup scene will feel less intense, but you will not feel any emotional connection, right? There'll be no emotional intimacy because they don't know anything about you, right? That's what we need to understand. Because the scene here between two people that are emotionally intimate becomes less about creating, you know, that whole connection because it already exists and more about those two people expressing it. Because the bond between them doesn't appear when the scene ends. It's still there when they're talking afterward, when they're talking about their day and dealing with the ordinary challenges that show up in any relationship. That continuity is one of the signs that intimacy exists. In those kinds of dynamics, intensity doesn't carry the entire weight of the relationship. It becomes one part of something larger. The scenes might be powerful and the adrenaline charge is still there, but the moments that, sit inside the relationship already has stability. And you can see this difference in the way people interact outside of the play, right? The connection, the communication, the relationship is more flexible. The intensity or it still exists, but it's no longer everything to hold up this, the entire house or the frame. This balance allows people to go further and deeper psychologically inside the scenes because they know the relationships, right? They understand them. They understand and know it's stable and they trust and they can feel freedom inside of it. So if something feels difficult in the scene, the relationship is strong enough to hold that conversation. And in that kink environment, intensity becomes something so collaborative between the two, it just expands on the relationship of what they are. So the dynamic becomes less about creating powerful moments and more about sharing them. It's probably the best way to say it. Look, intensity remains part of the experience, right? The emotional charge. But the relationship no longer depends on those moments alone. The intimacy between two people carries the connection forward when that scene is over, when you're not performing for others. And when that happens, when the intensity stops being that foundation, that relationship becomes something much, much healthier. It becomes an expression of the bond that already exists. All right. Before I close this out today, there's a few things I want you to sit and think with. Right? Intensity is one of the things that draws a whole lot of people to the lifestyle in the first place, right? The scenes look powerful. The focus between two people can feel rare in the world where most of our interaction are distracted or rushed, right? So for a period of time, two people are completely present with each other. And that kind of experience can be very meaningful. But the strength of the moment and the depth of a relationship are not always the same thing. A powerful scene can leave a lasting emotional impression, right? The vulnerability was real, the attention, the connection during the experience, they may all be genuine. At the same time, intimacy grows at a different pace, right? How we talk, how we share, our willingness to be open beyond the roles that we've chosen to define ourselves. Intensity might be the first thing that brought both of you together, but intimacy is what keeps you together. It's what keeps you growing, keeps you moving forward. Neither cancels the other out. Healthy dynamics they coexist side by side. But the intensity of the scenes becomes something that expresses the connection rather than something that replaces it. And recognizing the difference helps people stay grounded in what they're actually experiencing. So let me give you my question for the week. If the scenes between you and someone else stopped tomorrow, what would still exist between the two of you? I want you to sit with that one, right? It's a little bit of a reflect. Still want to see you all answering. I don't care if it's on Spotify or YouTube or, Substack, Fetlife, doesn't really bother me. I want to see you guys answer, right? Don't hesitate. I talk about my life in here on occasion so you all can feel a little bit more comfortable. And I know not everybody's comfortable, but I want to keep the engagement up, right? Also, I want to start hearing some of your acts of kindness. Okay. I'm going to a puppy and cat shelter this weekend. I'm going to go donate some time. So I'm probably going to go and very much love on the animals. I will probably get very little work done and then probably end up donating some of my money. But if that doesn't work, then I'm probably going to end up like washing the dogs or cleaning up poop or whatever. But that's what I'm going to go do this weekend. It's going to make me feel better, recharge, connect with my soul. There is something I want to address. It's totally has nothing to do with, and you all are going to go, what the hell does this have to do with anything? But I'm going to say this because a comment got made to me a couple of days ago. It's not really in the whole I'm making you famous now, because I'm not. It's a difference of opinion. Um, the subject, or maybe some of you know, some of you don't know. There's a thing where whatever country you are born into the world, your birthright as a citizen of that country. If you move, some countries demand, like if you decide to move and immigrate to a new country, that you renounce your citizenship to that country. It's not uncommon. Now, um, the United States is one of, like, I think it's two countries in the world that charge tax on their citizens abroad, right? Now, apparently, if you wanted to renounce, it was quite expensive. It was like 2,300 US dollars now, plus 2,350 actually, I think it was. Now, recently, the reason it was lowered back to, I think, like the 2010 rate of about 450, and that's coming up in April, was because there's expat groups all around the world. And they're like, hey, first off, this is a barrier. And there's a lot of reasons that has nothing to do with that being unpatriotic, but I don't want to be charged 50% tax. And, something some of you all don't know. But the point I'm trying to get to make all this, because I don't want to make this all about renunciation and getting away. I'll always be a patriot, but I don't appreciate people calling me or saying that I'm not and calling me less than. And these are people I kind of respected. Not anymore. They're entitled to their opinion, but we just, difference of opinion. And that's okay. I mean, I know one or two of them listens to me here. I'm not any different as a person, whether or not I stay with my birthright country or not. Doesn't make me any different of a person. So I'm still me. I'm just not, for me, I'm considering a possibility because to pay 50% income tax is really not, feasible for me. So, you know, anyway, enough about that. Nope, don't have any book updates. That's a question I got. Somebody keeps asking me. I have another book that it's actually something else, but I'm going to turn it into a book, but it's unconventional like what I normally do. It has nothing to do with BDSM. It's more like a spy thing. Probably going to finish that one first, but I don't know. But no, there's been no other movement on my other book for the lifestyle yet. I did get a question about two things: classes and upcoming any worksheets. Worksheets I haven't gotten to because I just haven't had the time lately. I'm going to see in the next few weeks if I can put one together, something new, upload it, and then it's there for you all. As far as a uh I don't know, like a getting together and doing like a class of something. I was possibly thinking of doing something for relationships, like a one-off, maybe a 1 or 2 hour event. If that's something that would interest you all, let me know. But the problem is, I know timing for a lot of you, so I tend to base things um, probably either Central or East Coast time. Sometimes I base it out of California if it's early enough. But my thought on this process is this: if I do this, you make it, and then you're like, oh, I want to do this, but I want to watch Sunday Night Football. Well, if this is about relationships, maybe stop watching football for a couple of hours. It's not going to be the end of the planet, right? So just consider these things. But we'll see. Let me know if that's something you all want as well. Then we'll go from there. All right, let me get back to my question one more time. Let's get back to the show where it was today with between erotic intensity and emotional intimacy. If the seed between you and someone else stopped tomorrow, what would still exist between the two of you? That's what I want to know. That's what I want to hear. Let's talk about it. Let me know your thoughts in the comment sections below. Until next time, everybody, be safe, stay kinky.